Hi kids, this is the introduction to the contextualization lesson. Contextualization is a different writing skill than CAP, but it is something that we will use all year long. I wanted to start with just a dream that I had in the past, a couple of weeks ago. So I recently had a dream where I was playing golf with my friends and Zac Efron, as one does. I literally could not hit the ball up in the air, and while my friends just shook their heads, Zac blamed my lifestyle. He was talking about what I eat, the amount of energy I waste, etc., and saying it was throwing off my balance with nature. And now nature was getting its revenge on me. Eventually, I hit a wedge up onto the green, and I thanked nature and went on my way. Now, as you see this the first time, there's probably a lot of confusion. Mr. Slim is weirdo. I don't really understand what this has to do with anything. But let me explain a couple of things. Number one, I love playing golf, and I am the girls' golf coach here at PR. Number two, I am currently in the midst of planning a golf trip with some friends for the first time in a while, so that's been something we've been kicking around the last couple of weeks. And number three, my wife has been binge watching the Zac Efron show on Netflix, where he travels all around the world and eats different kinds of foods with his friend and learns about different lifestyles. So those ideas, those three ideas, give you context. It puts this dream into context for you. Oh, now it makes sense why Mr. Slim is dreaming of each of these things. And that's what contextualization is. It takes a really specific event in history and broadens out the scope a little bit so that we see the bigger picture. You could think about it as a photograph if you would like. I'm sure some of you on your phones, you have a photograph of you making a silly face. And if we're just zoomed in on you making a weird face, it might give people the impression that, well, you're a weirdo. But if we were to pan out in that picture, perhaps you have two friends next to you who are also making goofy faces. Perhaps as we pan back, we see the background and we see that you're at the beach with your friends. So the more that we can broaden that scope, the more that we can zoom out, the easier it is to understand why historical context or contextualization matters. Here's another way to put it. If you've ever seen the beginning of a Star Wars movie, that scroll that occurs in the beginning of it, that is contextualization. Yes, you're going to get dropped into a space battle, but before you get there, you're reading this information to give you, oh, here's why things are going on the way they are. It might not give you every detail, but it's going to give you a broader view so that you can view those specific events with a little bit more clarity and understanding. So what is context? How does it help us to get a full picture? How might this help us historically? Well, if we're looking at a very specific historic event, it doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It is influenced by things that happened before and during that event, and it will influence things moving forward. So we want to draw attention, especially in our writing, for the reader to those things. There are three parts to historical context in writing. Number one, a broad trend that is going on. We want to shoot for like 50 to 100 years prior to the events. So for example, if I'm talking about the Civil War, 50 to 100 years prior puts me kind of at the beginning of the United States. You might be able to discuss how slavery appears in the US Constitution. If we understand that it is a part and it is enumerated in the US Constitution, that gives us a better understanding of how we get to the Civil War that you're going to be talking about in the rest of your essay, that really specific event. Second thing we need, so we got broad trend, number one. Second thing that we need is a proper noun or historical example that shows that trend. So going back to what this really means is we want to be able to point to something in history and say, this happens right here. So I have my trend, but here's an example of what I'm talking about that happens right at that point in time. Maybe I use, in our previous example of the US Constitution and slavery, the 3/5 compromise in the US Constitution. And then finally, we have to link that trend to the topic of our essay. We have to show how it's influential, why it matters to the topic of our essay. So a linking sentence might be something along the lines of, the 3/5 compromise shows that the view of the founders and the people of the early United States were already discussing and thinking about what slavery meant for population purposes. That is only going to continue as the idea of rights of slaves moves into the 19th century. This is a stupid example. Who is more likely to win the Super Bowl this year, the Steelers or Eagles? My contextualization is going to set the stage for my eventual answer. While the Eagles finally won a Super Bowl a couple of years ago, much of the core of that team has moved on. The Steelers opened the season last year with double-digit victories before losing, and the Eagles finished 4-11-1. And so now I'm not talking about this year just yet. I'm talking about what happened prior to that is going to lead us into this particular year. Then I'd move into my thesis statement from there. Contextualization is a more historically correct way of writing an introduction for a history course. Here's another example. You can view this on your own by pausing this video, but again, it's going to set the stage for something on the events of the Cold War. Then in class, this is what you're being asked to do. Pick one of these and pretend that your essay, and fake essay, an essay that you're writing is based on one of these topics. Then consider 50 to 100 years prior, how can we develop a contextualization paragraph for this? My instructions, 3 to 5 sentences max. That's as far as you want to go. 3 to 5 sentences for contextualization. It should be clear, broad trend, historic example, link or influence for the topic of the essay, which are these topics right here. As always, you can ask me any questions if you have them. You can upload those to the Google Classroom, the assignment in Google Classroom. Have a great day.